Do you feel stressed a lot of the time? Or do you have problems concentrating? Or do you feel tired and run down? Or just plain discouraged and like you don't have any control over your life? Well, I think, and actually what I think is supported by a lot of scientists and a whole bunch of research studies, what I think is that you need nature. And today I'm going to tell you why. So I'm really lucky because when I'm sitting in my office at Cornell, I have a bunch of plants that I can care for, and I also have actually 3 windows with views of nature, of trees, actually also of a small lake, Beebe Lake on the Cornell campus, and also of a rooftop garden. So I can see nature in my office and outside of my office, but not everyone has these opportunities. So there's an environmental psychologist at the University of Washington, and his name is Peter Kahn. And he was really interested in this question of when people don't have views of nature outside their windows, sort of how does that impact their levels of stress? So what he did was he conducted a study, and he had 3 different treatments. And these were all office workers at the University of Washington. So the first treatment was just like my office. People were able to look out a window and see what was going on in everyday life. And there was actually some elements of nature in their view. There's some trees. There's actually a small pond with a fountain, and I think some plants around that fountain. And I actually know this because the University of Washington is one of my alma maters. So the second treatment was the office had absolutely no windows, so people just looked at a blank wall. And then the third treatment, we call it the plasma screen or video treatment. So what Kahn did was that he covered up the window with curtains in people's offices, and then he actually replaced the window with a plasma screen. And the plasma screen was attached to a video which was outside the window. And what that video was doing was it was recording everything that went on just as if you had a real life view of what was going on. And it was the same view as those that looked out of their window, their actual glass window, at nature, at this fountain and these trees. And then what Kahn did was he took these people in these 3 different treatments, 3 different kinds of offices, and he administered some tests that were meant to induce stress. I'm just going to tell you what the tests were, and I don't know which one you'll think is most stressful. But the first one was a 10-minute proofreading task. And then the second was a 3-minute name a droodle task that asked for clever labels for ambiguous drawings. And the third, and this one would be the most stressful to me because I'm really a terrible artist, it was a 7-minute invent a droodle task that asked for the creation or the subjects to create their own droodle. And then finally the last one was a 10-minute tin can unusual uses task that asked for different uses for the tin can. So the people in these 3 different types of offices that went through these different tests actually exhibited some stress, and what they used as a measure of stress was heart rate. So they showed increased heart rate. And then what Kahn and his co-researchers did is they measured recovery from stress, and the indicator they used was decline in heart rate. So what did they find? Well, first, that those people like me who are lucky enough to be viewing nature right outside their window, actually their heart rate declined more rapidly than people in the same office but without an outside view. In other words, those people staring at the blank wall. But you might wonder then about the plasma screen or the video treatment. And actually what they found was that looking at the plasma screen of the view that was going on outside was no different than the recovery rates from the blank wall treatment. And they also found that the longer you looked out the glass window, the greater the physiological recovery. But this was not the case with the plasma screen treatment. So what does all this mean? What are the lessons here? Well, you might not want to tell your boss, but the lesson is that if you can see nature from your office, the longer you look out the window, the better, especially if your boss subjects you to stressful tasks. But what do you do if you don't have a window that looks outside at nature? How might you reduce stress? Well, again, you might not want to tell your boss, but the recommendation is that you take a walk in nature. So you can think of it this way. We humans have evolved over 5 million years, and more than 99.99% of that time was spent in natural environments. But we know this is no longer the case. So, for example, right now, over 50% of people globally live in cities, and in industrialized countries like the US, this can be over 80% of the people that live in cities. So scientists in Japan claim that our urbanized life actually interferes with our evolutionary history, and that this is the cause of stress. So these Japanese scientists, they've conducted a bunch of experiments with middle-aged employees, both men and women. And what they did was they took them out of the office and into the forest to participate in what they call in Japan forest bathing, which is essentially walking in the woods. And then they measured lots of things related to stress. So they measured after people walked in the woods, as compared to before they walked in the woods, were there changes in their level of cortisol, which is a so-called stress hormone, and were there changes in their blood pressure or their pulse, and also changes in what's called their natural killer cell activity, which is an indicator of immune function. And they found a positive effect of forest bathing or walking in the forest on all these indicators of stress and health. And then there was another study in Korea where they actually worked with younger people, females in this case, between the ages of 18 and 25. And they subject them to several treatments, one of which involved walking in the forest and the other walking in the gym. And these young women reported that when they walked in the forest, they actually felt happier than after they'd walked in the gym. So there you have it. These are just a couple of the hundreds, if not thousands, of studies on nature and human health and well-being. And they all say that if you're feeling stressed, unhappy, or having trouble concentrating, try forest bathing or taking a walk in nature.